Hi everyone, so today we're going to be talking about anthrax, and you might have heard of anthrax before because shortly after the September 11th attacks, somebody started putting anthrax in the mail, and 77 people got sick and 5 people actually died. So anthrax is actually the name of the disease that's caused by a bacteria that's called Bacillus anthracis. Okay, so this is actually the name of the bacteria. So let's go ahead and look at this bacteria for a minute. And the first thing is this is a gram-positive bacteria. So what I mean by gram-positive is when you try to stain it, the stain will stay on it. Like a lot of gram-positive bacteria, this is going to produce an exotoxin, which we will talk about the exotoxins in just a minute. The name Bacillus means it's rod-shaped. Okay, and it also forms spores. So it's a spore-forming bacteria. Okay? This is important because this can help it live for a long time. They have found anthrax, or Bacillus anthracis, that's still alive after being in the soil for over 60 years. And a few years ago, they actually found on the tusk of a mammoth that had been buried in ice for up to 60 years. So the spores are going to play a very important role, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. But before we do, there's 2 things we want to talk about with this. And the first one is the Bacillus anthracis is, let's talk about the capsule. So what happens is this is surrounded by a capsule that is made up of peptidoglycan. So peptidoglycan is in itself is made up of sugars or carbohydrates, and it's made up of proteins. The most important thing to remember, though, about the peptidoglycan is the fact that it makes it slimy. So this is slimy. And because it's slimy, this can escape phagocytosis. And we're going to see in a little bit that that plays a very important role in anthrax conditions. So it's slimy, and so it makes it phagocytic. Now, the other important thing about Bacillus anthracis is that it produces toxins, like we just said. It produces exotoxins. And basically, there's 3 components to this. The first one is something we call the Edema Toxin. And like the name says, this is going to cause edema. We're going to look at this in just a little bit. The second one is the lethal toxin. And the lethal toxin is going to kill cells. And then there's something that's called protective antigen. And we call this PA83 for short. Okay, and we'll explain the 83 in just a little bit. So that's basically what we're going to look at here now with the Bacillus anthracis. So let's take a look at what happens. So we have now our bacillus, and let's say this is our bacillus right here, and then it's surrounded by a spore. All right, and there's our spore. Now, I'm showing what it looks like when it's surrounded by a spore. For the rest of this, I'm just going to draw my anthraxes, the red dots. Okay, so we have a bunch of these. So what's going to happen here is, let's say you breathe this in. Okay, we're going to breathe this in, and then what's going to happen is it's going to go into the body, and it's going to enter into a lymph node. So to give you an idea, we're going to go like this, and now here's my lymph node. Okay, so there's my lymph node. This comes inside the lymph node, and basically it's going to get phagocytized. So inside lymph nodes, I have a whole bunch of, I have macrophages in here. And so it's going to get phagocytized by the macrophage. Once this is inside the macrophage, what it's going to do is it's going to break out of the spore. It's going to break out of the spore and it will start multiplying. So now it's starting to multiply. Now remember that slimy layer we said that is on the anthrax? That's going to help it escape from the inside of my macrophage. So these are going to come out now. And now I've got my Bacillus anthracis here. And from here, it's going to go over into the bloodstream. So now it's entered into the bloodstream. So it's my bloodstream, and of course, like everything else, it can travel now once it's inside the bloodstream. So what happens next? On your cells, you have a receptor. Okay, so I'm going to draw a cell right here. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the cell membrane, which is a double lipid bilayer. But I'm just going to represent the cell membrane like this. So here's my cell membrane. Okay, and then I have this receptor on here. So let's make the receptor red. All right, and then the receptor actually has some little hooks in there that helps it attach onto the cell membrane, and then it has a co-receptor. This is my co-receptor, and I'll explain all this in just a minute. And this receptor is going to be called my anthrax toxin receptor. And what the anthrax toxin receptor does is my anthrax is going to release some toxins. So one of the toxins it's going to release is something that's called, like we just saw, PA83. So the PA83 now is going to come over and it's going to fit inside of this antitoxin receptor. Okay, so this is my PA83 now. But also that what's been released has been my edema factor and also my lethal factor. We'll do lethal factor in brown here. All right. So this is my edema factor. This is my lethal factor. There is a protein or protease that's called furin. F-U-R-I-N. And what it's going to do is it's going to slice this in half. So the top of this is going to come off, and this is called PA20 because of the weight. And so if I subtract 20 from 83, I end up with PA63. So that's what I have left there is PA63. So now, what's going to happen is after this is off, right, that's off, so I'm just going to draw this here. So now I have my PA63 right here. This is going to multiply. It's called opsonization, right? And this is still my cell membrane right here. This is going to multiply. So to give you an idea of what this looks like is we have one there. So imagine I have like one marker like this, and then I have another and another because it's multiplying, another and another. And now it's going to become something that looks like that. So to give you an idea of what it's going to look like, it would look something like this. Okay? And this is called the PA heptamer. That's the PA heptamer right there. So it's made up of 7 pieces. Now, what's going to happen, and you know what, I should just draw this right here. So this is going to multiply. It's going to become the PA heptamer. And so it's going to look like this. Okay? And then this is still my cell membrane right here. That's still my cell membrane. What's going to happen now is I am going to have 3 either edema toxins or 3 lethal toxins attached to this, or a combination of both. but it's going to be a total of 3. So let's say I have an edema toxin, right? It's my edema toxin, and this is my lethal toxin. Okay, and they're going to attach this. So this is going to attach here. There's one of those. Okay, so in this case, we have 2 of the lethal toxins and then 1 of the edema toxins. So now what happens is this. Now that this is here in the cell membrane, it's going to be sucked inside the cell. And as it comes in, this actually forms, the cell membrane actually forms a big loop. If you notice, these are gone too. And that's how this is able to come inside. So once it comes inside, it looks kind of like a birthday cake, doesn't it? Once it comes inside, it's going to be inside a vesicle. So this comes in, and eventually, as this sinks down, the top of this closes off on it. So if I go like this, right, and then the top of this is going to close off on this, and this has become an endocytic vesicle. Okay, so that's now an endocytic vesicle. I still have my 7 parts. I still have my toxins on it. Okay, so I still have my toxins on it. Now, what's going to happen now once it's inside is there is something inside that is called an early endosome. So this is my early endosome, and the early endosome is acidic. The inside of this is acidic. It has a pH of about 5.5. Technically, this is a lot smaller than this. Okay, so I'm going to redraw this right now. I'm going to erase all this. But this is a lot smaller than this. But what's going to happen is this will actually bond with this, and then this PA heptamer will actually enter into here. Okay, so let's draw that real quick. So now here's my early endosome. Okay, and my heptamer comes in. Now when the heptamer comes into here, I'm going to draw this kind of big, but it's not really as big as this. But because the inside of this is acidic, what happens is my heptamer forms a pore in the middle here. All right, so this is going to be a pore right here. And then I'm going to go like this. And if you notice now, this is not inside, this is actually halfway in the membrane. See that? It's halfway inside the membrane. So what can happen now is now my edema factor and my lethal factors can all go out through the pore. So let's do the edema factor first. Here comes my edema factor, and it's come out. My edema toxins come out. What's going to happen now is inside the cell, basically when hormones land on the cell membrane or certain parts of the cell, what they will do is they will cause ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. So this is my ATP molecule. This is called adenosine. All right, and then I have a phosphate, and a phosphate. So they call it adenosine triphosphate. What's going to happen here is normally this will lose 2 phosphates, right? So this will lose 2 phosphates, and then we're going to write that as PP. We're going to put an I just because it's inorganic. And then this goes from being adenosine triphosphate to cyclic adenosine monophosphate. Remember, mono stands for 1. So see how I only have 1 phosphate right there? So this only has 1 phosphate there. Okay, and then normally what's going to happen then is this is going to go and it's going to help a phosphate attach onto a protein. And remember, it's usually induced by a hormone. So when we get the hormone coming on, that's when it knows to make these. Well, with lethal factor, what it's going to do is it's going to speed up this process. So now I start getting too many cyclic AMPs in here. So let's say I only need one, but now I have a lot more. And what will happen is when I start to produce these and there's too many and it's out of balance, this will lead to edema. And remember, edema is swelling, right? Now on the opposite side, I have my lethal factor, my lethal toxin. It's going to come out, and then you have a protein. I'm sorry, you have a protease, and it's called MAPKK. Okay, that's just the abbreviation for it. It's mitogen activated protein kinase. Normally what this will do is if I have a protein, let's say I have my protein right here, right? I have my protein right here, and let's say I have parts on this protein, and let's go ahead and put a blue on there. Normally what this will do is it will come and it will cut off parts of the protein, and basically it will help differentiate what that protein's function is. Okay, that's what this does. It basically cuts proteins so they can differentiate, and it helps with cell growth. Well, what basically lethal toxin does is it comes and it inactivates this, it destroys this. And when you destroy that, your proteins can no longer differentiate. Proteins can go on to become things such as enzymes. So if I don't have the proper enzymes, basically what will happen is a cell will no longer work properly, and it can lead to something called apoptosis. This is cell death. Apoptosis. This is cell death. So it leads to the death of the cell. Now remember, if we have a whole bunch of this happen in an area of the body, such as the lungs, it can cause a bunch of problems such as death. So for the most part, that's how anthrax works. So let's talk a little bit more about this now. And like we just said, if this happens in the lungs, normally what's going to happen in the lungs is when it first starts occurring, the person may feel like they've caught a cold, they may be a little sick, some mild symptoms, because my bacteria is multiplying. The Bacillus anthracis is multiplying. Once it becomes full blown, it's usually about 100% death rate. The other thing that can happen is, let's say we have an area of the skin, and up here we're going to have basically our epidermis, and then this would be our dermis. And then what we're going to have here is we're going to look at the skin as if the skin has been cut. So I get my cut right there, or a wound if you want to call it a wound, right? And so what's going to happen now is I'm going to get my anthrax in there, in the spores, and then what's going to happen is the spores are going to open up, right? Just like they did everywhere else. But the spores will open up, and eventually down in here in my dermis, I am going to have blood vessels. And so what's going to happen is my macrophages are going to come out of the blood vessels, and they're going to go up to attack the anthrax. Okay? And just like we've seen in everything else, what eventually is going to happen is my anthrax is going to release my, let me get a different color here. The anthrax is going to release the edema toxin, and it will release the lethal toxin. Now, because I'm getting an immune response from the anthrax, what's going to happen is that's actually going to push the skin cells up, and I'm going to get something that's called a papule. And a papule is a solid raised bump that's less than a centimeter. Once my edema toxin gets going, it's going to release, or it's going to cause swelling, and then I'm going to get edema in these areas in here. So when this is full of fluid now, we call that a vesicle. You guys know a vesicle is like a blister. Usually a vesicle is a fluid-filled bump, basically, that's less than a centimeter. And then what's going to happen is my lethal toxin is going to start destroying skin cells that are in the area, right? So I'm going to start to get, and they're going to start to turn black. So I'm actually going to get a little bit of an ulcer in here. At the vesicle pop, I get an ulcer, and then I have my the black skin that's from the death from there. So when this occurs, this is called an eschar, right? Because it's black. And eschar means coal, and so it's just the skin has turned black. This will go away. The good thing about this is called cutaneous anthrax, and the good thing about cutaneous anthrax is the fact that the toxins do not get down here into the bloodstream, so it doesn't spread throughout the body, right? It's going to be basically self-contained. This usually has a very good survival rate, and usually eventually it goes away, especially if you treat it. The other way you can get anthrax, because we talked about the lungs, and that's basically everything I've got done showing you. Now we're looking at it here on the skin, cutaneous anthrax. The other way is sometimes people will eat something that has anthrax in it also, and it will have the same result as here. The macrophage will eat it, the edema toxin and the lethal toxin will be released, and it'll actually start to kill gastrointestinal cells. So, and that has about a 50% success rate, or death rate, I should say. So that's basically it for anthrax, and thank you for watching.